So Anna, first of all, if you're still there, Anna, let's bring you in from Tbilisi. I'm going to bring, who was I going to bring? I was going to bring in, I think it was David from, who's our friend from Hackney, our London Borough of Hackney. If you're still there, make yourself known.
I'm here. Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me?
David, fine. I'll bring you. So I'm going to bring Anna in from Tbilisi. It seems from Tbilisi to the London Borough of Hackney is a natural jump, which we cannot ignore. So we'll do that. We'll then go down into Saudi. We're bringing you Jackie. I'll bring you and Andrew. I'm sure you want to come in from Australia. And then anybody else who wants to come in. Nadine, I'll bring you in because we've worked together in Jakarta. I'm going to be back there. I was there for a week just a few weeks ago. I'm going to be back there for 2 weeks in February in February doing some work. We'll bring you in, Nadine, as well. So we will try. Can I please ask you to keep your points short and sweet? Feel free to make them, but to realize there are a lot of people who'd like to go around. Anna from Tbilisi, great to have you here. Please come on in.
Hi, everybody. Everyone. Very interesting discussion. So we're talking about small problems that are scaling in our cities. So flooding is something that happened in Tbilisi, and it. So what we were talking about, not giving a permit, buy out lands. What happened in my city in 2015 was deadly flood. Entire zoo was flooded. Most animals, unfortunately, died. We had 22 casualties, and the river that flooded the city is tiny river that you cannot even see it. It's there. But what we do, we forget what happened. So I guess I even didn't know we had this typical flood 30 years ago. And there were discussions of not giving the permits in that area, not having any development there, and especially having a zoo. We were thinking to move in the zoo, but it's taking forever. And guess what? 30 years later, we had deadly flood again. Now the government started thinking again to buy out the land, not giving the permits again. And we did. We bought most of the land out. We relocated people. But recently, I realized there are a couple apartment buildings are still went up in that territory. So permits were already given, and there was no way to buy out that permit. So what happens down 30 years later? So people are going to forget what happened because we already did. So we have to learn from our mistakes. We have to learn from the past, and we do forget. What I want to make sure that we have some kind of leverage. So when something happens, the law changes or something gets put in the place that 30 years, 50 years later, we don't forget about these problems we had. So we're facing problems today and we need to resolve it, but we need to put something in place, some kind of strategy that down in the road, 50 years later, same thing doesn't happen.
Anna, the only lesson we can learn from history is we don't learn lessons from history. I mean, that's it. That is the truth. It just loops around every generation. Great stuff. Just for those of you who don't know, Anna is Chief Resilience Officer of Tbilisi, so is absolutely deeply involved in this. From Tbilisi to the London Borough of Hackney. David, let's bring you in. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be here. So in short, I'm basically the corporate BC manager for Hackney Council, and I'm also an incident commander. So now and again, I'm a Silver. I work with the police, fire brigade, and ambulance services. But what I've got from this meeting so far, someone mentioned earlier about incidents occurring, debriefs, lessons learned, public inquiries. I was recently at a webinar with the military, and what we agreed is on, like, we had the Grenfell fire, until certain members involved in these incidents in positions of responsibility are jailed or fined severely. All of this nonsense about lessons learned is almost a throwaway thing. It's like the word resilience. What does it really mean? What do lessons learned mean? And it looks like in the old days, before computers, we used to have a file and we put it on a filing cabinet, on a shelf. I think that's what's going on with lessons learned. So until government steps up and say, right, you oversaw this issue or this organization, you are going to jail. You're going to be fined. Until that happens, we're going to get nowhere. So I'm very skeptical about debriefs, lessons learned, and public inquiries. But talking about in Hackney, I'm seeing some really sexy looking buildings going up. Now, we're having a lot of rain. When you walk along the streets with these lovely looking buildings, guess what you see? There is no break on the pavement level. It's the same level that you access the building. And architects are not thinking about rainfall, the increase in rainfall. And that's another issue. So when we talk about getting people together for collaboration, I think, imagine that we're in a big room, all of us here, and we're putting our heads together. I think where we should start is with a risk register. What are the risks? Have we modeled the risks? Have we thought about these things? And once you go from risk, what are the impacts? And what we're trying to do in Hackney is to say to residents, look, the temperature, the planet's warming, it's more rainfall. We need to warn and inform you and educate all residents about what and prepare them for what the risks are and the impacts of those risks. So it's also up to local government, I think, not so much central government. Hopefully, central government supporting local government with funding and professional help to educate public. That's my input. But yeah, it's all about risks, impacts, and that's where we start. And groupthink is dangerous.
I think you're right. People talk about no blame culture, but that doesn't mean you don't have responsibility. And you look at something like Grenfell Tower, which you mentioned, that was criminal negligence. That was not a mistake or an error. There was people deliberately bypassing the regulatory authorities and deliberately being put in place. I wrote a paper on why regulation fails. And I'll share that with this group. If anybody has anything else that they would like to share with this group, feel free to share that with me. We will share that. We're going to set up the CSWP, Centre for Study Wicked Problems, as a forum to share information. So please feel free to share stuff with me. I've seen there's some connections being made already. If any of you want to connect with anybody else, let us know. As I said, we very, very much see this as facilitating. Tatiana, did you want to come in for a second? Yep.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. All the best. Just to say, but for anybody who doesn't know, David talked about the sexy buildings. Everything in Hackney is sexy, David. Everything. I think you should be proud. That's right. Good. Sorry, Tatiana, over to you.
Never been, unfortunately, but I just wanted to maybe launch a call to action from my end. We're launching in a partnership with the UN High-Level Climate Champions a yearly program, and we want to do a baseline analysis on coastal resilience. And so if anyone is interested to join, support, collaborate on this, ideally what we want is to then deliver a framework for the region, for the MENA region, on how to move forward, talking about coastal resilience. What does that mean for the MENA region, so for Middle East and North Africa? But as we mentioned before, and as Chris rightfully was saying, we face similar situations around the world, and I'm sure we can support each other with the best practices, case studies, and things that maybe you can share of what you've lived and or what you're working on in other parts of the world. We're about to start this project in January. So maybe, David, when you come in January to Dubai, we can also tell you more. But call to action to experts and scientists or anyone to come and join this study. Thank you.
It's interesting. I've just been looking up. I was meant to be in New York and talking to. I'm just trying to quickly find this here. Talking to people from the United Nations. serious climate. I'll look it up. But we were talking. I was meant to be meeting with the UN climate people in New York next week. That's been cancelled. Unfortunately, I'm not going there now. But we'll definitely look up. Tatiana, we love call to actions. We love action-orientated activity of any sort. So feel free to see us as a partner and an ally and a supporter and a resource, and we will definitely do something about that. So besides that, who are we going to bring in? Jackie, we're going to bring in you from Saudi. In you come.
Thanks, David. Do you know, a couple of words came to mind listening to Eduardo and Kirsten and Tatiana and Chris and Anna. Sticking plaster. And, you know, I just think I've been in emergency management and safety and risk for over 25 years. And we start to talk about things in a slightly different way and come up with different frameworks and different cycles and different ideas. But actually, we're not really moving in any shape or form to come up with sort of solutions. I think I'm really interested in what Tatiana is saying about what's happening in the Middle East, because I'm now out here. I've been out here for 5 months. But I guess from my previous experience in local government in Scotland, and again, great shout out for Grangemouth from Anna, just down the road from me, actually. So I think it's a whole societal approach here. And, you know, sometimes, you know, it's really difficult to start to get those connections, particularly if you're working in emergency management and you're talking about climate, because you're dealing with the impact and the consequences of flooding or heat or the extremities that you've talked about. One of the biggest successes we had in my area was the integration of planning, climate team, looking at biodiversity, looking with the flood engineers, and looking at actually how we could start to work differently. And David, you've heard me say Storm Babette last year. My area was in the red warning. We were absolutely hammered in terms of flooding right across the area. And I think one of the biggest things that came out was a flood protection scheme that was built in 2011 to the then climate specifications actually became useless because it overtopped because of the way the rivers were starting to work. And every time we've had a flood, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, the flooding has been worse and worse and worse. And so now we're saying, well, actually, it's not build back better and it's not recovery. These words are great words, but actually it's about stepping out of the box, being innovative and not looking at it in a singular way. It's actually, again, back to government, as everybody has said, to look at this on a bigger scale and say, well, actually, it's not just an issue for where I was in Angus, but actually it's climate right across the board. And until governments start to take that holistic approach, we will continue to have the same conversations. My final point on community, again, we've had a lot of success, probably because we are very rural and a lot of towns and villages, but we have community resilience groups that are very much around sustainability. They've been given funding, they're empowered, they have their emergency plans, they form part of our emergency response. And during all of our storms, they stand up in their incident management. They've got a route in and out to us. And actually, in a lot of cases, they've been very self-sufficient because we've supported them either to get the funding, to get the resources, as in physical resources, but also things like flood sacks, also equipping their houses that if they are flooded, then they are actually able to recover a lot quicker within a couple of weeks because they've actually got the right equipment. And we've done road shows to give them that empowerment. So no one size fits all. I was on the same webinar last week, as was Stephanie, who's put in the chat around the inquiries. And I think I was astounded actually at some of the data that was coming out around the 2,000 plus inquiries. And actually a lot of work still to be done. But what's coming through is the same theme. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect something to be a different result. So I think huge issues, not just about climate, but around everything that we do. And until we integrate and collaborate and get this at a higher level. But I do worry that if COP can't sort it, then how do we actually influence that change? And just a final point, we've got UNESCO conference here in Jubail, Learning Cities on climate next week. So that'll be a really interesting one in terms of listening to what they've got to say, particularly around the Middle East. So thanks, you.
Jackie. I mean, as you say, there's no shortage of events. There's no shortage of inquiries. There's no shortage of reports. There's no shortage of anything. And there's shortage of action and funding. The next inquiry, we can write that now. We don't need 6 years, $200 million to write the inquiry. We can write the executive summary right now. They're all when we do our academic work, we do an exercise and we take inquiry reports. We just anonymize them, and they're all exactly the same. They're exactly the same. It's about responsibility. There's something called high reliability organizations, academically, high reliability, non-failure organizations, which are basically technological based. But the fundamental underlying principle of high reliability organizations is not the technology, but the acceptance of the responsibility of risk management. You've got to accept the responsibility. If you don't accept the responsibility, nothing else happens. We are moving fast. Time is moving. These 2 hours, we're an hour and a half in, about 24 minutes to go. I want to get around as many people as possible. We're going to bring in Nadine from University of Gloucestershire, who was involved in the Building University for Leading Disaster Resilience, the EU program in Jakarta, which very kindly I was invited to be part of. I was a part of the academic team around that. I'll bring Andrew Blades. I'd like to bring in Lincoln Nathan from Lagos. I spent a year and a half in Lagos, and if you think you've got problems, go to Lagos, my friends. If anybody ever has a chance to work in Lagos, work in Lagos. Because once you've worked in Lagos, nothing else ever worries you again, ever in your life, ever. I promise you. And I say that as someone who loves Lagos very, very deeply. So let's bring you in. Nadine will bring you in. Andrew will bring you in. We'll try and bring you in, Lincoln. Def will come to you as well. And then whoever else wants to come, and if we've got time, we'll bring you in. Nadine.
Right. Hello, everybody. And thank you, David, for inviting me to contribute. I have to say, I don't have much to say, simply because I'm trying to process everything that I've heard, which I think there's a real richness here. And interestingly, I have been talking to my students in the last few weeks about wicked problems, systems thinking, etc., etc. And I have been teaching managing business continuity for 4 years now. And I must admit, every year, the first few lectures are becoming more difficult because we're talking about the global risk landscape. And I will start by asking students how positive and how optimistic they feel about the future. And actually, every year, the mood has become darker. And I have to say, I found it more and more difficult to approach those sessions as well, because I agree with everything that colleagues have said about the difficulties that we are facing. And I suppose for me, one of the biggest challenges is to think about education. How do we actually educate future managers, future policymakers, future entrepreneurs, not just in business, which is my field, but actually across the board, because it is about understanding hypercomplexity. And yes, we've done some good work, I believe, in terms of finding systemic solutions, modeling systemic solutions to problems. But I suppose even my level 6 students who I spoke to last week about environmental management, environmental issues, climate change, and then also labor issues. This week it's going to be about anti-corruption, so that's going to be interesting. They were saying, but hang on a minute, this all sounds very good, but actually the problems that we are facing are also systemic. And that's exactly what colleagues have echoed around the room, is we're not moving forward with our systemic solutions because the problems underneath are also systemic. And we are now only beginning to understand that side of the coin. So for me, I suppose we have, as on my side as academics, we do have quite a big task on our hand to remodel education and to teach that right thinking so that everybody understands the impact of what they're doing potentially positive way, but also in a potentially negative way, and thinks through the different elements that need to be addressed. And I suppose the other thing that for me is very important is for individuals to understand their responsibility, because if we don't change collectively, and if we don't help people understand their individual responsibility, and I think Chris, you mentioned earlier the importance of involving ordinary citizens in finding solutions. And I suppose that's also very important. It's not just something that governments do in terms of imparting policies and so on. It's not just something that organizations do by developing their sustainability agendas. Actually, finding solutions starts with us and understanding our circle of power. And I suppose for me, that's very important. I think I'm going to stop there because time is moving on.
So thanks, Nadine. And again, it has to be systemic. It's not partial. It's not, to use that phrase. It's not here and there. By the way, if anybody is in London, tomorrow evening we have our ISRM London chapter networking event, 5:30 to 8:30. We have Matt Clark, who is the director of UK Resilience in the Cabinet Office, as our guest speaker. David, if you are interested, drop me a line and we'll put you on the list for that. So just drop me an email. But if anybody else is in London, you'd be very, very welcome to come down. I'm not even going to mention the free wine and chips because then you just get overwhelmed. But if anybody would like to come down, you're very welcome to do so. Andrew, let's bring you in. Steph will bring you in. Lincoln will bring you in. That probably bring us to the end of the program. But let's bring you in. Andrew.
Cheers, David. As always, a very interesting discussion. So a couple of things that I've noted is, yes, I love lessons and I love hearing about learning lessons. But basically what we're doing is saying to a high school student, I'm going to throw 10 textbooks at you. You work out what you need to learn. When we do organizational learning, there's a process for that. People who are serious about their organizational learning actually have people that are working out what are we going to learn, how are we going to learn it, what's going to change, what's not going to change. And we don't do that. We just, here's a review, 200 recommendations, and you talk to big corporates, their executives are seeing maybe 10 reviews at every meeting that they've got, not all on emergencies, but on other things. They're just overwhelmed. And then we wonder because we're not actually going through a process to teach and some form of system around that. The other thing is the system is remarkably resilient. That's why it's not changing. Like we think about resilience as a good thing. If you're a gardener, you will know that weeds are incredibly resilient plants. You don't want them there, but they're remarkably resilient. So every time a new problem comes up, people go, well, this current system, if I can work within it, I'm all right. We've got to get to think about resilience in a far more holistic way. It's not always good. That's one of the reasons things aren't changing. The current system is very good at being resilient to new ideas and saying, well, it's going to be too hard to change from fossil fuels, so we're not going to. And that's a very resilient economic system. It may not be delivering a good outcome in the long term, but it is very resilient. And I think we need to think about resilience from both sides of the coin. We tend to only look at it from one side. The other point I would make is very interesting talking about community, but if you're a systems thinker, that doesn't really help you very much. Communities exist within a society. One community wants one thing, the next community wants something totally different. We've got to look at this far more holistically. I think those countries that are deciding we're going to take a societal view as to how we drive some of these things forward are positioning themselves to be far more systemic about the way they think. And my final comment would be a lot of the risk stuff's very interesting. We need to do a lot more consequential thinking. And that's certainly starting to be seen in a lot of the cyberspace. They're focusing on what are the consequences. They're not worried so much about causes. They are focused on what happens when this goes pear-shaped and how do we stop this particular bad thing from happening. That's me. I tried to keep it short. Not sweet, but short.
Always good. Thank you. Stephanie, let's bring in Steph. Really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. Do you want to come in and share some thoughts briefly?
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I'm not really sure what I can add on top of what everybody else has already covered, other than to try and, I guess, synthesize some of it. Somebody said, what about bouncing back, bouncing forward? For me, I think the main thing that frustrates me is this constant need to reinvent the wheel rather than just reconfiguring what already exists. We talk about this constant need for more resources, more time, more money. But actually, what if we already have enough? We're just not using it particularly effectively. And we're not using it particularly effectively when it comes to the context of things like wicked problems. We have a number of huge chunky reports out there about foresight, horizon scanning, and lessons, and all of these wonderful things. But how do we bring all of that together and start to use it in terms of that pathways approach to risk-informed development? How do we do that piece that starts to bring all of these systems and these processes and these ideas together that focus into building capabilities to all eventualities? And for me, that is something that's really important, because I'm studying multi-hazard risk management, which sounds like I'm throwing up on people, but it's not. It's a really complex thing about multiple hazards, but what is the interactions between those hazards in terms of our plans, our policies, our arrangements? When we talk about what do we do when we need to evacuate people, but there's a flood, but there's also a pandemic at the same time. How do we make sure that we've got the trade-offs, the synergies, the long-term, the short-term? How are these all interconnected and accounted for in that policy-making space, but also in the planning space going forwards, and making sure we're building those advanced capabilities? I think a lot has been covered. I think my brain's slightly melted almost, but I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And Jackie, thanks for the comments about putting up posts tomorrow. I'll do my best.